Hello, my friends. Welcome to Aurelian Coaching Weekly. Thanks for joining. This week, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. So if you guys have been joining me, you know that Aurelian Coaching is really, the point is to try and teach people how to think differently, to develop a management mindset. So whether you're managing stuff at home or at work, whatever it is. I usually don't teach people how to do things, but this week is an exception. And the reason it's an exception is because in my own work life, I really struggled with managing meetings. And so I want to talk today, the theme this week is how to run efficient and effective meetings. And I have a method that is going to change your life. It's going to change your life, okay? Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was working corporate office, I had an 8 to 10 hour workday, and 75% of my time was meetings. People would book meetings into my calendar. They would say, and then they would always make me required, right? It was a lot. And the default was an hour, right? Everybody would just pop an hour into my calendar without thinking about, does it really take an hour? So I really needed to solve this problem. There was no way I was going to get all my other work done, especially as I moved up the ranks, if I was constantly in meetings and conference calls. So I started experimenting, and I came up with a method that really, really worked for me. And I started to implement it with all of my direct reports, all of my teams, all of my clients. And you guys, it was the single biggest change that I made in how effective and how efficient I was at managing everything. And so I want to talk to you guys about that this week. So one thing that I really struggled with was how people who were taking notes in meetings were just writing and typing constantly. I wanted to try and capture every single little thing. I understand that, right? Especially if it is content that you don't have command of yet, right? And you're trying to get everything down because you're thinking, I may need to go back to this stuff in the future. Fine. I will teach you a way that will do that so much more efficiently than writing down what everybody says and whatever is happening, okay? But number one, I want us to realize that there's something about this safety net. It's like a comfort blanket to be able to take all these notes, right? And some people will even say the act of taking notes, the act of writing it down helps to reinforce it in my mind. Maybe. But I also think that sometimes this need to take copious notes means that you're not paying attention as well. You're so focused on getting everything down on paper or down on your laptop that you're not paying attention, number one. And number two, you don't get to participate as much, right? And that's the shift that I'd like to make sure that we make, is how do we be fully engaged in that meeting, participate, listen to what other people are saying, and just be so much more efficient about it. Okay, so the first thing that you do, okay, you can do this for yourself when you set up meetings with other people, but also it's a perfectly valid way of being able to control your own time and your own calendar, that when people are setting up meetings with you, that you ask this question, which is, what is the point? What is our objective for this particular call or particular meeting? Okay. Now, to be clear, this is not always just so obvious, right? People set up meetings all the time to discuss something. Here's where I want to challenge all of you. What if we didn't set up meetings to discuss anything, but we set up meetings to decide something? Okay? In that meeting, the whole point is to get consensus and make a decision. Discussions can happen offline if there is reading material that can be distributed in advance so that everybody comes to the table prepared and ready to vote on something. Wow, does that cut down a lot of time, right? So be able to communicate, this is the point. We are meeting to decide this one thing. So come prepared. Now the second, and what that does, by the way, is usually if that is the purpose of the meeting and you can focus on that, meetings don't have to be an hour. They may not even be 30 minutes, right? Set the meeting. If people understand that they can do some legwork leading up to the meeting because they know the meeting is all about making a decision, then how much time do you need? You may be able to cut it down pretty significantly, okay? Now it's all about setting expectations and letting people know that they may have to do some legwork in advance, but that's okay, and you can facilitate that. But if the point is to be really efficient in the meeting, have one objective, make one decision, make sure everybody is ready to help make that decision. The second thing that I want you to try this week is a different way of taking meeting notes. So I was talking about this earlier, the need to take copious meeting notes. And if you had to stop and think about why you want to take meeting notes, it's usually record keeping, right? You want to have some sort of documentation for posterity, right? That's fine. A lot of times what good meeting notes, what constitutes good meeting notes are what are the actions or the follow-up items, who's going to do it, and what the timeline is. That's fine. But usually, if I had to guess, usually when you need to go back to your notes to figure something out, it usually isn't to find out what were we supposed to do, or who's supposed to do that, or what was the timeline. If I had to venture a guess, the reason you need to go back to your notes is less about those details and more about how did we get there? What was the rationale for that decision and that action? And there is something to that that is so important. And so that is the one piece that I want everybody to try to incorporate in their meetings in the future, is to document not just what actions are going to be taken, but why. Okay? And so I don't want people to come say, well, it's so obvious why we should do that thing. Here's what I mean by documenting rationale. If you can articulate why that decision gets you closer to the team's goal or the objective of the project, right? That is the purpose of documenting rationale. The reason this is so important is there are a couple of reasons. One is it clarifies so that everybody agrees on what the rationale is. You would be surprised if everybody agrees on what the action is, and then you ask everybody, why is that a good decision? how is that going to get us closer? People have different answers. And it's important to tease that out. We all have to be on the same page about why we're taking this action and why it's good for this project, this initiative, whatever we're trying to accomplish. We have to be on the same page about that, okay? Number two, and this has definitely happened in meetings, is when the note taker says, okay, we made the decision, we're ready to go on to the second topic for the meeting, but time out. I need clarification for the notes on what the rationale is. Sometimes it's really hard to articulate. And unless you can clearly articulate it in just a sentence, okay, it is a really good exercise to clarify what is the purpose of all of this. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening are people are just caught up in what to do rather than why we're doing any of this, okay? The third reason rationale is really good is because I don't know if this has been your experience, but meetings wander sometimes. So a lot of this is solved by setting the objective up front. But if you didn't, or if the meeting organizer didn't, right, what ends up happening are topics start to come up that were never on the agenda, right? And people get distracted by things, right? There's a new urgent issue that just came up and it really feels related to this thing, and so we need to address that and we're going to take action. That's fine, but sometimes when those new things, those urgent things, those things that come across our desks that where we need to put out fires, they feel really important and we want to take action. Sometimes when we express the rationale for the action that we're going to take, it causes us to question whether that is really in alignment with our overarching goals. I know it feels super urgent to deal with this thing right now and make this decision, but if you can't articulate how that decision gets us closer to what we're trying to accomplish, guess what? We need to revisit that. Okay, so being able to articulate rationale prevents these sort of knee-jerk reactions to a lot of things that just kind of come up, or people bringing up new things and new topics in meetings, right? Really serves to ground you. So it's a beautiful thing. I want you guys to practice this, right? So focus on meetings where the objective is to make a decision. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is to state who has the authority to execute on that decision. Okay, so a lot of times people in meeting notes say that this person is going to do that thing, or they don't put a person's name down. They say that group or that team or that department is going to handle that. You always have to have an individual's name associated with an action, okay? Now, it may not be that that person is going to do it, but they are accountable to it, right? They're going to come back next week and provide a progress report for whether it was done, or it has to be accountable, okay? So that's what authority is. Who has the authority to execute on that decision? Third is the rationale, right? Why does that decision, why is doing any of these actions going to get us closer to what we're trying to accomplish? And then, of course, the timeline. When is this stuff going to be completed? All right, so decision, authority, rationale, timeline. This is the DART method for deliberate planning, something I created years ago, and I've implemented it with all of my teams, and I promise you, it will change your life. It will make everything so much more efficient. We got to the point where we just had a table. There was no typing out a bunch of stuff. There was just, everybody was focused, pens down, laptops down, everybody was engaged. Everybody was focused on what is the one objective, what is the one decision that we're trying to get to here, okay? Who's going to have authority? Why are we doing this? How does this fit into the larger initiative? Can we make sure that it's directly aligned? And then finally, timeline. And we just had a table, and we just, boom, D-A-R-T, and it was such a beautiful thing. And if you guys are in a client or service-oriented industry, and you have conference calls with them, and you implement this method, oh my gosh, they love it. They love it. Imagine getting an email from a vendor or a, and it's just 4 sentences that beautifully capture what the decision was, why we made that decision, right? Who's going to do it in the timeline. It's beautiful. Okay, so I want you guys to practice this week. If you're a part of Skill Masters, the email tomorrow will review some of this stuff, but the one-page tool that I always include in the weekly emails will be the DART method. It'll be a practice sheet. And what I'd like you guys to do is go back to the last meeting or the last conference call that you had. Okay, and maybe it was scheduled for an hour, and maybe there was all this discussion, and that's fine, that's fine. And maybe you took a lot of notes. Maybe you took a whole page of notes, okay? What I would like you to do is implement this. Go through those notes, go through that whole meeting, and see if you can tease out, what did we decide? Who has the authority to execute on it? What is the rationale for how that decision gets us closer and serves us in this project team or in this initiative, whatever we're trying to accomplish? And what's the timeline? And if you can drill it down to 4 sentences, let me know if anything else is missing. Really, rationale captures a lot. It captures a lot. And the one thing that I want to make sure people don't do is use the rationale column to take all the copious notes, to provide all the backstory and all. No. This is one sentence for how that decision is going to get us closer to what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so try that this week. It'll change your life. It takes some practice, okay? Implement it with yourself. Okay, so go back to some meeting notes, try it. And then once you get the hang of it, this is a beautiful method for preparing to go into a meeting, right? So whatever you would recommend or suggest to be able to articulate the rationale for your particular recommendation or suggestion is such a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful way to organize your thoughts. It's super efficient. And it saves so much time and grief, and it really gets everybody focused. So try it this week. All right. So a sneak peek into next week's topic. We are going back to teaching you guys how to think rather than teaching you what to do. So next week, I am going to delve into the topic of a victim manager mindset and how to avoid that. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the difference between responsibility and accountability, okay? And how to really own, as a manager, right? Own the situation. Own everything that happens in your project teams, in your initiatives, with your clients. We're going to draw a line between responsibility and accountability and make sure that you understand what a victim manager mentality even looks like. You may not even recognize it, but once I explain it, everybody will say, oh, I had one of those. Okay, so you want to be able to recognize it, and then you want to be able to avoid it. As a manager, you always want to be in a position of empowerment and enabling your direct reports and your clients and your customers to ultimately get to where they need to be and succeed. Okay, and having a victim manager mindset does not get you there. Okay, and so we need to be able to recognize that and step away from it and use ways of thinking and tools to make sure that we're empowering rather than being victims. Okay, so that's it. That's the sneak peek for next week. Thanks for joining. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week and weekend, and I will talk to you next time.